with Jaime Penaherrera. He's the Community Engagement Director for the City of Santa Rosa, a position they created just for you. Amazing.
It's a good
flattering.
role, certainly.
What is a Community Engagement Director?
Yes. Good question. You know, when you ask people about the definition of community engagement, you get different answers.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly because it's a field that is, it's new, and it's different, and it's manifested differently. In our own community, we have a few community engagement people, typically geared towards specific program or specific population.
Right.
But you know, my kids were asking me about that, and so. And my daughter, Sophia, says, "Hey, Papa, is that related to weddings or something like that?"
So, engagement,
right. I said, "Not quite, but might as well be, you know, because it's a relationship, really. It's a bridge that we're trying to build between the community and City Hall. It's as simple as that. And in the process of doing that, we need to understand the issues that are affecting our community and find a way to bring that voice to the table. You know, we're actually thinking in terms of what's called open government.
Okay. Yeah.
And that is a new paradigm in the sense that now we're talking about collaboration, we're talking about participation, and we're also talking about transparency.
Right.
Those are the tenets, I think, and when we're trying to create community engagement with our community and earning, reiterating that trust that we have with our community members, which, as you know, is changing dramatically as well.
It is. The culture has changed. Everything's changed. It's a definitely new era, like we were talking about a little bit earlier. But community in Santa Rosa, it's such a vast notion. I mean, it's just, Santa Rosa is really like 40 different communities in one.
Yes.
And you are charged with sort of trying to represent and engage all of them.
Exactly. And so that's one of the challenges, because you're right, if you go to a specific quadrant of our community, the demographics change.
Yeah.
Right? And the culture and the perceptions and the level of engagement even changes from area to area. So our ability to discern that and to understand who are we dealing with and what needs those communities need are very important. So in my role, I need to cater to all of our community, not just a specific group. And so as I go out, I need to be acutely aware of the messages and the needs that those communities may have.
What are some of the tools you have in your toolbox at City Hall to do that?
Well, we certainly have a variety of different things. You know, one of them, I'd say, is technology, right? And so when you're talking about engagement, social media, it's changed the name of the game.
Yeah.
You know, just in the last 10 years, when you think about, you know, we didn't have that ability to communicate both ways, right? Social media enables you to do that. In the past, you may have had a static website.
Right.
And it's just one way of communicating, right?
And it goes from you
one way
to them.
That's
it
right.
doesn't come back.
It's not asking for input. So now where we're out there, we are communicating constantly, and people are asking questions. The level of tolerance, if you will, for waiting for an answer is this big, right? So it's instant gratification, and we need to be aware of that. Likewise, with their communities where it may not necessarily be participating in a social media environment. And so how do we cater to those groups, you know?
Yeah, so you've got one group that expects answers immediately,
right?
That's using social tools to get to you, and another group you have to engage directly without all those tools to get their input.
Explain and articulate and get their input too. So that's the other thing. You see, now that we have this open channels of communication, how do we create that dialogue in which we are listening, but not only that, are we taking that in and implementing those ideas to the extent that we can. So that's new in government.
That's huge, and that leads me to the question, like, you're the guy who has to make sure it's just not lip service, right? How do you do that? Because that can be overwhelming, I would imagine.
Yeah, so it's really a lot of it is having the right people at the table, also being realistic about the expectations, and also understanding that this is a journey.
Right.
A cultural shift doesn't happen overnight. And so just making sure everybody is on the same page in terms of what we're trying to do is important, but also taking baby steps in the sense that right now, for instance, we were testing the concept of open government, and along with that, a tool. You asked for tools. The Open Government Ordinance. It's one of those tools that enables us to be even more proactive in terms of soliciting input from the community. So how do we make sure that we're listening, right? And not only that, go back and say, hey, because of your input, here's what we've implemented. We don't necessarily have to agree on everything, right? But the fact that we're having dialogue about whatever issue it is that is affecting our community, and they're big issues, as you know.
Yeah.
Just the fact that we're having dialogue, that's very important because there's perceptions about government, right? And for the most part, there's apathy, there's this sense of bureaucracy and all that.
That an individual can't manage change.
Right. And so how do we change those perceptions too? Because at the end of the day, when you go to the city, there are people behind the counters, right? They're like you and I. They mean well. They want to help. They're committed. They're passionate. And sometimes we get the public doesn't get a chance to see that.
Right.
And then on top of that, you have this magnified view of whatever is going on, that good or bad, well, typically when it's bad, it just explodes and it gets magnified.
Right.
So it's kind of a give and take. In my role, I try to kind of explain that to people as well, so now you have a mechanism by which you can contact me and say, hey, Jaime, I've been trying to deal with this. Can you help us navigate internally, right? So it's a new beginning in a lot of ways.
And so, but you're managing not just, like you said, like the old days would have been a static website. You have all these different channels with which you can communicate to the community. Do you have a staff that's like monitoring Twitter, hashtag Santa Rosa?
Luckily, we have a decentralized way of communicating. Most of the departments have somebody in that particular role monitoring the social media outlets, and so
because each department has.
Not all of them, but the larger ones
will have their own departmental person.
They would have a coordinator or somebody in that role that is monitoring our social media activities, dealing with the media, or updating the website, or creating collateral marketing material, or being table in a booth. We participate in different events, and so since it's a large enterprise, managing your branding around that is a little complex, especially for a governmental agency.
It's fascinating because with the community element, with that reciprocal relationship with the public that you can actually speak to and hear and converse with and dialogue with, you've taken what would normally be like a public relations function in some ways, or even a marketing function with notions of branding, that kind of stuff, and added this other element. Is that difficult to maneuver, like working with all that messaging material when you're not just doing output, you're actually getting input at the same time?
Yeah, it's actually, I welcome that because I think that you're more effective if you do that. You're constantly soliciting input because then the buy-in is there from the beginning.
And a sense of ownership.
Right, exactly. So because we've all participated in the process. So I like to collaborate and I function better in a team environment. Yeah. So for me to get that type of input, irrespective of where it's coming from, I welcome that because now the end product is going to be better compared to what I came up with in the first place.
We're with Jaime Penaherrera. He's the Director of Community Engagement for the City of Santa Rosa. We'll be right back. And we're back with Jaime Penaherrera. He's the Director of Community Engagement for the City of Santa Rosa. You're not from Santa Rosa originally.
No, I was actually born and raised in Ecuador.
Yeah.
And I've been in Santa Rosa for almost, I think, 15 years. Prior to that, I lived in the East Coast in New Jersey and Boston and New York.
So, okay, so you go from Ecuador to the East Coast to Santa Rosa?
Mm-hmm.
So tell me about that journey. Like what inspired you to come up?
Oh, it's a long story. But
I got an entire 8-minute segment. Let's do
it. In essence, growing up in Ecuador, and when your ability to see the big picture is limited, by what you see, then you think, what else is out there? And so I was lucky enough to be able to come to the States with my mom. She used to import stuff from the U.S. back to Ecuador, and she's done that for 30, 40 years or so. Pretty unusual for an Ecuadorian woman growing up in an era where, you know, roles were very different, even to this day, to a certain extent.
What was she like, to run around?
My mom is, she was here last November. She came to visit me. She's in her mid-70s, very strong-willed woman. You know, she's one of those ladies that, you know, something's in her head, she'll make it happen despite of what you think or society would think. So she's a trooper. She's traveled. She's done her own thing, having a business, importing on her own. With not much training, you know, she was able to do that. So I was lucky that she saw that and said, you know, well, maybe there's a place that you may like. And so I came to the States and, you know, fell in love with what I saw, and I decided to stay. And
was it just you, like the other kids?
Just me, just me. And you know, I was 22 at that time, and you know, it was an interesting journey for me. So I'm able to see many different things. For one, my experience as an immigrant in this country and what I have and what I've been able to do is just incredible to me. At the same time, I see the disparities that we have and the labels associated with somebody who's coming from a different place. When I arrived in the U.S., I didn't speak the language. Not that I do now, but I tried. but I tried. And so, you know, my dream was to go to school and then go back to Ecuador, but life got in the way, and then I stayed. And so this is home for me. You know, I love this country as much as I love Ecuador, that's for sure.
And you seem to be a known quantity when it was announced that you'd be taking this position at City Hall. Like, people are like, oh, of course, he's the guy, right? What were you doing prior to being the community director?
My background is in healthcare, nonprofit strategy, marketing, PR related type of roles. And so I've been in the community behind the scenes for the most part, doing what I could do to help our community. And I worked in Napa for almost 7 years or so. So I used to commute. And that enabled me to see two communities differently. And I always try to build bridges between the communities and learn from each other. So I'm grateful, you know, to be able to stay in our community and be, you know, in charge of this new department that was created at the city out of nowhere, really, you know, and out of a need to, and that's courageous when you think about it, you know, how we were able to create this new role, recognizing that we had a disconnect between the community and City Hall. So my skill set kind of you know, brought me to this point, and I feel like I utilize that on a daily basis, irrespective of what I'm doing.
What is the difference between our community and other ones? Like, you know, spending time in Napa and all that, because this is a unique position that you've got. I don't think if there's any other municipality that's got.
No, as far as I know, and if there is, there may be a role of a community engagement coordinator reporting to a department for a specific program.
But you have a, I mean, more global view, so to speak, for Santa Rosa.
Right, and I think in our case we have a direct relationship with the city manager.
You're down the hall. I mean, you're
right. So we and you know, working closely with our city council members and the community is a little different, and we've gotten inquiries from other communities asking us about the blueprint and how is it that we're able to do this. Even at the California Assembly saying, you know, Jaime, we're watching closely and see what you guys are doing, because we would like to emulate this type of role throughout different communities.
How does it make you feel knowing there's a bit of a spotlight on you?
It's just flattering, right? So I think that we have a unique opportunity to shape that, because when you look at the job description, you'll see a variety of different things that were added to the role, and so our ability to funnel that and make concrete steps and have an impact in our community, it's there. So there's no roadmap, if you will, because this is new, right? So it's up to us to craft it and find a way ultimately to be of service to not only our community but also internally to our departments.
See, that's what's interesting to me as well. You're you're working not just like with the community directly in Santa Rosa, but you're actually working with the government itself to show it how to be more open, to facilitate dialogue with the community and that kind of thing. And one department or at least a program you inherited, which seems sort of abstract in one way, is the what's called the partnership, which is the former Mayor's Task Force on Gang Prevention. I think
that's right.
Partnership's a much better brand.
Yeah, it's easier.
Now, at first, that would seem like that would be a whole different kind of program that doesn't work with community engagement. But I see the logic in it a little bit.
Yes.
Can you kind of explain why?
Oh, certainly.
Yeah.
When you ask for a tool, that's one of the things I was going to mention.
Yeah.
It's a tool in my toolbox of community engagement. We're very proud of the work that we've done with the partnership. When you look around, it's a well-oiled machine. We have the infrastructure, we have the funding, we have the policy, we have the political will behind that to make an impact in our community. In the last 10 years, for instance, we've collaboratively, obviously, we've been able to decrease the dropout rates, able to increase the high school graduate rates, able to decrease violence, and able to create programs that are of service to vulnerable populations. So we're seeing,
in terms of like they can be pulled into gangs.
It could be pulled into a gang of violence activity. So we're seen as a national model.
Yeah.
Right. So there's precedence for that. So I think that for us is to make sure that we continue to grow. So take it to the next level. So what we're thinking now is not really an interaction between police force and a young person. It's really what's going on beyond that, what's called the determinants of health. The zip code that you live in will determine how long you're going to live. So when we're looking at violence, we're thinking, okay, there's an issue here, but what's going on around that in the neighborhood, in the family, in the community, access to food, transportation, socioeconomic issues. And we're not going to be able to solve all those issues, but we have 50 partners at the table that work with us collaboratively that may be able to have a collective impact.
So you have sort of a holistic approach to it. And that's interesting. That's a lot of where your background comes in, thinking of it as almost like a health issue in some ways. You know.
Exactly. It's a public health issue.
Yeah.
Right now, for instance, for us, housing and the homelessness situation, and at some point I'll come back again and talk to you some more about that. But that's a public health issue. It's not really something that the city can solve. It's not something that just one or two organizations can do. This is a community effort, including the members of our community, in terms of understanding what's going on, right? I took a tour the other day, Brookwood down there, and you go there and you see needles, you see human excrement, you see things that are going on, but at the same time, there's stigma against homeless people. And so I feel like we need to have that dialogue with our community to understand, first of all, what is homeless, and homelessness is a symptom, really, of a larger issue, which is housing, right? And so how do we address this whole thing and then compartmentalize those issues and talk about each of them separately?
Let's just explore a little bit of that when we come back. We're with Jaime Penaherrera. He's the Community Engagement Director of the City of Santa Rosa. We'll be right back. And we're back with Jaime Penaherrera. He's the Director of Community Engagement, or Community Engagement and Director. Does it matter? Is that
I guess it doesn't. One of those.
But very important work you're doing. And before we took a break, we're talking about how, for example, homelessness is a symptom of what is actually a housing problem. Right. Like, what mechanism do you use to sort of look at something that needs to be spoken to and alleviate it, that's problematic, to roll that back to its source? How do you make those discoveries?
A lot of it is data driven, right? Yeah. But also I think it's the level of noise and awareness about a specific topic. So if the community feels there's something not quite right, even though the statistics, when you look at the homelessness situation and the number of homeless and sheltered people, it's not necessarily growing.
Mhm.
And in fact, the majority of the people that are homeless, about 80 or 85%, are actually Sonoma County residents. So so what's going on, right?
Right.
And so then when you think about well, from a more comprehensive point of view, you start thinking, what is causing that? One of the issues that we've seen is the smart train, right? So in the past, there would be a lot of people, a lot of people living along the railroad.
Right, and now that there's
all of a
construction.
sudden there's construction, now they're being displaced, right? And so there's more awareness with the creeks also, right? So there's cleaning and maintenance and all that. So the visual appeal in what you see in our community, it appears that there are more people out there. And so that's creating some of the anxiety in our community. And so we need to be able to talk about that candidly, right? And at the same time, what are we doing about that, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a collaborative approach. It's something that one organization cannot solve. It's a socioeconomic public health issue. So how do we have the right people at the table, and then logically and realistically start thinking about what do we do as a community to address this issue? And then we have tools to borrow from, and most importantly, the funding needs to be there.
Right.
The political will needs to be there. And it seems to me that around the issue of housing, homelessness, and all the things, all those things are aligned,
Mhm.
right? So then is when the community input comes in, and there are other organizations that are also very interested in this topic. So how do we join forces and not operate in silos, right? So how do we collaborate? That's really a challenge,
Right, I
really
imagine, yeah.
understand what's going on, who's doing what. You almost need like a visual map as to what's going on throughout the city, and then strategically start tackling each of those issues.
So Santa Rosa, I mean, we've talked about how it is very much a new era, and there's a lot of cultural shifts happening everywhere. And one of the things that seems to be a point of resonance is, are we a big city? Are we turning into a big city? And if so, how do we head off some of what ails a city like San Francisco, say, as we grow? Because we're not going to stop growing, I don't think, right? And this is something I talked to the mayor about a little bit and all that, the sort of the looming sense that we're more of an urban center, right? Do we embrace that? Do we fight it? How do we transition gracefully?
You can't fight it. I think, when you think about demographic growth, transportation is making it easy for people to commute, tourism,
right,
and all that. I think the question is, how do we work with that? How do we make the best of that, and think strategically about how is that affecting our community, number one, but also how can that benefit our community? We're the largest city between San Francisco and Oregon, the Oregon border, right?
Right, on 101, yeah.
And so I think that how do we capitalize on that? But also with that growth, there's growing pains, right? And so there's also land issues, right? There's capacity issues. And so I think that having people that are able to project themselves 20, 30 years from now, it's important. And so how do we envision our city to maintain that character, right? Because we all love our community and we don't want it to change. But the reality is we're only 60 miles north of San Francisco.
Right.
You don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure out what's going on beyond Santa Rosa, even Cloverdale and Lake County and all that. And so that's changing dramatically. I think that it's something, like I said, that we need to embrace and need to work with in a way that is intelligent and well thought out.
So if you had a vision for what Santa Rosa could become, like your Santa Rosa utopia, right? What would that look like? And I'm not coming at you out of the blue with this, but
I'm going to send you a bill or something. Well, I've been lucky enough in my career to be able to travel a lot. I've visited about 40 different countries, and I've lived in a few of them, and I cannot help but compare things. And, and so this is a very beautiful part of the world. And so how do we maintain that character, right? How do we, I'm so proud when people visit me to take them around and all that. So how do we maintain the integrity of our community and embrace it? Roseland is is one example of that. What a unique area in our community. How do we maintain that character, right? And so it's very unique in Sonoma. And how do we grow it? How do we support it? You know, and so for me, I'm thinking maintaining that that beautiful aspect of our community, but also making it friendly for businesses, right? So because we need that, we need the tax revenue to support that infrastructure, to support that growth, but at the same time, you know, borrow from other communities, because we're not the only one going through that. Many of those communities have embraced, you know, a communal aspect, but then also a business aspect that is integrated into that growth.
I know, and it seems sometimes with Roseland, for an example, that there's a fear sometimes that annexation really is just the first step towards gentrification, right? And we're seeing like gentrification of a sort, like in Petaluma, for example, and places like that. Is the G word a specter in this, or is it just
it's hard to know. I think that ultimately, when you compare the services that Roseland is getting today vis-a-vis what Roseland should be getting, yet a couple of miles from downtown. Right, and so when you think about, the law enforcement services, the infrastructure, the even buses, and things of that nature that the rest of the community is enjoying, how do we integrate that? I mean, the challenge really is how do we, like I was saying, how do we maintain the integrity and the character of that community without disrupting it, but yet embracing it, you know? And so, there's some areas in the world where you have specific areas in town which become a tourist attraction. So maybe can we build something from, the station for the train to have a commute kind of deal with that specific. I'm just making that up.
No, I'm
just thinking, so how do we embrace it, rather than thinking, okay, this is just going to be a bad thing for our community. Obviously, there will be growing pains as well, and that remains to be seen.
But I think the idea of preserving the character, I think that's a really astute observation on your part to, like, first off, recognize there is a character that should be preserved, right? And then finding a way to accept growth and the challenges therein, but while maintaining the heart of what Santa Rosa is in all of its diverse neighborhoods and stuff.
We just had a Cinco de Mayo event, and about 10,000 people. So I used to be the co-chair of the Cinco de Mayo event when we had it in the Finley Center, and we didn't have that many people. Right at the time when we started to have gang activity, that's why the gang prevention, task force was created in the first place. No incidents since then. It's a community event. There's no alcohol served, et cetera, et cetera. So that's an example, how that character could be maintained and embraced by the community.
And successfully. So.
Successfully, then.
Jaime Penaherrera from the City of Santa Rosa's, the director of the City of Santa Rosa's Community Engagement Office now?
Yeah, Community Engagement Office.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, and come back on anytime you want to talk about something. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Cheers. Yeah.